The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon and good morning to those of you out on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us today for our course rating quiz review webinar. Just first off, I'd like to confirm that everyone in the audience could both see our screen and hear my voice coming through here. So if you would, please go to the questions tab on GoToWebinar, and please just leave us a comment whether you could hear us and see our screen as well. Perfect. All right, getting a couple of confirmations there. So moving along here. Just as a couple of notes before we get started today. Due to the large size of our group today, we have set everyone in the audience to mute. And if you do have a question or comment during our webinar today, please feel free to type it into the questions tab in GoToWebinar. That's on your dashboard. I see a lot of you have used that already to let us know that you could hear us all right here. But certainly any questions that pop up throughout the session, please feel free to put them in the questions area, and we will get to them as time permits, going over each question. We will be answering questions at certain points today during our presentation. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. But if there are any questions we aren't able to get to today, we will provide a Q&A document that's going to be sent out to all attendees at the end of the series of these webinars. With that, I can pass it off to Scott Hobley, who's going to get us started today.
All right, thanks, John. So couple things is that we did another one of these, as most of you know that registered for this. There were two options. So we did our first webinar last week, and then we're going to wait till today's is over to put together that Q&A document. So myself, I'm going to be taking about half the presentation today, and then Matt Duffy, who's sitting to my right, is going to be taking the other half. What we're going to do is we're essentially going to review the quiz and go over each question and how we the answer that we expected. And then, kind of see the results from our grading that we did. I just talked through some of the ones that maybe more than a few people got wrong. Then we're going to go through the submitted questions. So those who took the time to submit questions in advance that they wanted answered on the general course rating system, we're going to go through those. And then any questions that pop up during the session today that you guys write in on that questions tab, we'll try to get to as many of those as we can before we have to wrap up. But I do have a few minutes at the very end of the presentation to talk about future course rating education and a video that hopefully we can share if we have time to kind of show you what we're working on, some of the video work towards some beginner training down the road. So a couple of things about the quiz. One, like I said, we did grade them, but we're not grading them to evaluate individuals. We're actually just grading them to see how people did on them. So we know that if there's certain topics we need to do better on in terms of education, or to determine if we need to write quiz questions in the future a little bit more clear, things that people were missing, we just kind of want to figure out if we can do better down the road. So we're not using this towards any evaluation of anybody's rating ability. It's not going towards any type of certification or lack of certification going forward. So it was really more of an exercise for us to kind of see where we could improve on some education and quizzes in the future. Second thing is, you probably noticed in the instructions that we didn't do a separate quiz for men and women. So in the past, in many of our calibration seminars, many of our sessions we've done online even, we've had specific questions for men, and then a second set of questions for women, or if we had a single question that had both men's and women's numbers in them. We've decided to go away from that. We really want to keep it simple, but also have raters be fluent, or if you want to say the word fluent, but able to rate both genders as needed to create more complete raters. And especially when maybe some of the teams are a little smaller, you may have to rate for a gender you're not normally used to. We really want raters to be able to understand the system from both genders' perspectives. So okay, so we're going to go ahead and go right into the quiz here. This will probably take us about 45 minutes to get through the quiz review. Like I said, we're going to go over each question, the answer that we came up with, and then kind of go over how everybody did in terms of the averages and maybe where some people might have missed. So question number one, this is a roll question. So due to a crossing penalty area that the male bogey player cannot safely carry on a 330-yard hole, they're only able to hit their tee shot 170 yards. The condition of the fairway for the entire hole is considered to be soft, and the hole is level from tee to green. What is the roll rating value for the male bogey player on this hole? So the first thing we typically look at is the table value. However, this one is a little bit of an exception. we do not adjust for roll, or we do not make a roll adjustment on a hole where they are not hitting a full tee shot. That's straight from the course rating guide, page 12. So there really is no table value here. The player is not hitting a full tee shot, so the extra roll or loss of roll that they would get would not be evaluated. The player is essentially trying to get to a specific distance and not, counting on extra roll or loss of roll to get there. So essentially, there's no value for the table. Then we have to look at whether or not there's adjustments. Now, like I said, the roll is not evaluated on the tee shot, but for adjustments, those adjustments underneath in the roll can only apply on subsequent full shots or from a table value that is something other than a 0. So essentially, the soft conditions actually do not factor in this hole. They don't factor in the tee shot because, again, we don't evaluate roll in the tee shot. And because this player can reach the green in the second shot, there is no additional landing zone. So that soft condition actually does not factor in. It's kind of overridden by the fact that they laid up. So essentially, the overall rating for roll then is going to be 0. And that's just strictly because we don't evaluate roll on a tee shot, or sorry, on a full tee shot, and there is no second full shot on this particular hole. A little bit of a tricky question, I think, for some. Only about 50% of the people that we looked at got this one right. I think the majority of people that didn't get it right put in answer C, although a few people also put in answer D. So either they were putting in the soft conditions as a +1 or putting in 1 from the table for some reason. So hopefully there's any. So actually, while we're going through the quiz, if you have any questions specific to the quiz question that we're reviewing, please write that under the comments or the questions tab, and we'll cover any questions that pop up during the quiz review. Any questions so far?
No questions on question 1, dear.
Perfect. Okay, and I'll take you through the first 5 questions, and I'm going to switch over to Matt here for the next 5 after that. So question number 2, on a sharp 360 yard dogleg hole, it's determined that the female scratch player cannot cut the corner of the dogleg. The rating team determines that the scratch player will hit a tee shot to a landing zone 180 yards from the center of the green. A full tee shot would put the player beyond the dogleg and into light rough. What is the dogleg correction for the female scratch player on this hole? So the first thing we look at is what is her tee shot distance. If we know that she's winding up 180 yards from the center of the green and her normal tee shot is 210 yards, she's hitting the ball only 180 in this case. That means that her dogleg correction, her normal full shot distance is 210, which would normally leave her at 150, but she's back at 180 yards. So that means this hole is playing essentially 30 yards longer than it would be if it was straight. This is not a forced layup correction. This is a dogleg. For those of you that aren't aware, we did separate out dogleg from forced layup in the course rating Form 1, but also in the system. However, the cumulative total of the two, so dogleg and forced layup combined, still has that plus or minus 50 yard maximum correction. But we do want to record doglegs and forced layups separately on the rating form because they are different. One of them is the player is able to hit a driver, but it doesn't really get them closer to the hole, and that's the case in this particular question. So you could have a plus 30 yard dogleg adjustment on one shot and a plus 30 forced layup on a different shot, and it would still be a maximum of plus 50 for the total. So the answer here in this case is plus 30. Again, they wanted to be at 150 with a full tee shot, but they're hitting the ball back to 180 due to the dogleg. So its answer is E plus 30. Questions on that one, John?
No questions here.
All right. All right, question 3. On a 400-yard hole for men, a 10-yard wide creek crosses the fairway starting at 240 yards from the tee. The fairway ends 20 yards short of the creek with light rough between the fairway and creek. What is the forced layup value for the male scratch player on this hole? So our normal full tee shot distance for a male scratch player is 250 yards. That creek starts at 240 yards. So if they hit their full tee shot, they're definitely in the creek. However, we always say that they want to lay up 10 yards short of the obstacles crossing the fairway. And that's, again, straight from the course rating guide. So that player, to be safe of going into the creek, we're going to say they have to play the ball to a 230-yard distance, which is 20 yards short of their full 250-yard tee shot normal distance. So the forced part of this layup is actually plus 20. some of you that got this one wrong put in a plus 30 or maybe even a plus 40, thinking that the player had to go back to the fairway to stay short of the creek. But the category here is a forced layup. What is keeping the player out of the creek? That's the forced part of it. That's 10 yards short of the creek. Anything beyond that becomes a layup by choice. The player, just because they're in the rough doesn't mean they're in the creek, they're in the water. So being in the rough isn't maybe ideal, but it's definitely not a penalty. It's not putting the player into the crossing obstacle. So that 230 yards is where the forced layup exists. So the answer then is C plus 20. So on this one, we had, I think I forgot the last one. On question number 2, the vast majority of people got that one right. I think it was at 85%. On this one, it was right around 65%. So a number of people didn't get this one. Again, the majority of the answers were putting in a forced layup of plus 30 to keep them 10 yards short of the end of the fairway. So actually, plus 40 would put them 10 yards short of the end of the fairway. So questions on that one?
No questions here.
Perfect. Moving right along. All right, and then question number 4, a little bit easier. On a short par 4 that gradually drops 24 feet from the tee shot to the first landing zone, but then rises 35 feet from the landing zone to the center of the green, what is the tee to green elevation that should be recorded on the form? One thing about elevation, we do look at the total elevation change. We're not looking at it on a shot-by-shot basis. It's just the difference between the teeing area and the green, and that number is rounded to the nearest 10-foot increment. So in this case, if it's minus 24 going down and plus 35 going up, it's a total of plus 11 from tee to green. Again, that gets rounded to the nearest 10-foot value, so that 11 goes back to 10, and that's our final answer then, A, 10. So 11 is not right, even though some people would say that's more right, that's more precise. We don't go into anything other than 10-foot increments just for not just simplicity, just because we're not usually that accurate. And then second, we don't round each of the shots. So the minus 24 doesn't go to minus 20, and the plus 35 doesn't go to plus 40, and then look at the difference. We round the total at the end of the adding those two together first, and then round. Questions on that one?
No questions.
Okay, and that one was, again, a pretty highly correct answer. I think 80% of people got it right. And just to give you some reference points, when we do these type of quizzes at our national calibration seminars, our average quiz score is probably in the mid to low 70s, so like maybe 72 to 75 range. So anything 70 or above is probably what we expect for people, and anything 80 or 90 or above is really above average. So only the questions that were below 70% do we feel like maybe people were missing something or kind of statistically below average. So. Okay, and the last one is a pretty simple one. It's just a straight true false. Shot length should be adjusted to take account of the effect of wind. This is probably one question that if you've been rating a long time might have actually tripped you up more than if you've been rating a very short amount of time. We used to adjust for wind on a shot-by-shot or a hole-by-hole basis. We no longer do that. We only adjust for wind as a 9-hole value. So it's a front 9 wind adjustment and a back 9 wind adjustment. We do not factor in how it affects each individual hole, much less each individual shot. So the answer then is B, false. We do not adjust landing zones. We do not adjust approach shots for wind. Again, that's straight from the course reading guide, page 17. So again, the majority of people got this one right. It's 90%. So only a handful of people actually didn't get this one right. And again, they may have been some of the more seasoned raters that just forgot that we made that change. So, okay. Any questions on number 5?
No questions.
All right, moving on along here to Matt Duffy, who's going to take you through the next 5 questions.
All right, thank you, Scott. To question 6 here. On a downhill par 5 hole, the scratch player's tee shot landing zone has moderate stance and lie problems and is 10 feet above the second landing zone. The second landing zone is 20 feet above the green with minor stance and lie problems. What is the topography rating for this scratch player? Okay, so for the second shot from landing zone 1 to landing zone 2, topography is based on the stance or lie difficulty only. So using the almost level with the fairway and moderately awkward gives us a final value, or gives us a table value of 3 right there. Just note within the table for topography, the elevation change is the shot from the landing zone to the green. So from landing zone 1 to landing zone 2, we're hitting the approach shot. We are not hitting the approach shot to the green, so we're just evaluating the stance and lie problem. So we're going to use the almost level with the fairway. So that value gives us a 3 just to start off with. The approach shot to the green is minus 20 feet with minor stance and lie problems, again giving us a table value of 3, right? So we have a 3 from our first stance and lie problem. We have a 3 with our stance and lie problem, as also the 20 feet down into the green. We don't add those two together. We just take the highest of the two values. In this instance, it's the same number for both landing zone issues. So our final value is going to be 3 for this scratch player for a final value. And just to give you some background, about over 80% of you got this right. So as Scott mentioned, certainly well above the national average for answering questions when it comes to topography, as well as any other questions. So John, any questions?
No questions on question 6 here. We actually did have one question come in on question 5, just as we were transitioning over to this one. The question is, going back to the wind question, why is this not factored? Doesn't wind play a factor?
Yeah, so we realize that some of you are typing, questions as we're talking, and maybe you don't get it out before we're done with that question. So we'll go backwards one question if we need to, but if you're asking a question on something that's 2 or 3, questions ago, we'll probably wait till the end. But on this particular one, we do factor in wind. Wind is based on a 9-hole or 18-hole adjustment. So we look at the average wind speed and we correct it based on the number of yards. The wind increases. It always increases. That's one thing. We never decrease a course rating or effective playing length because of wind. Wind, while it might be on your back some holes, it's going to be in your face on others. It's going to be a crosswind on others. Overall, the wind is always going to be worse than having no wind. So we made that decision to just do an overall wind adjustment. And also wind shifts. It changes from day to day, from hour to hour, from minute to minute sometimes. So it was really hard to say we're going to evaluate a specific hole or a specific shot based on a wind that might change 10 minutes later, an hour later, 2 days later, et cetera. So it just was more complex than it was worth. And the overall wind rating is actually an average of what it would have been if we had 6 holes upwind, 6 holes downwind, 6 holes crosswind, which was a very consistent, common way that holes were laid out on a golf course. So it actually does a really good job without having to do a lot of complex evaluations. So.
All right, Scott, thanks for that explanation. Moving right along to question 7, where just over 75% of you got this question right. So once again, really good. On a 450-yard hole for men, the first fairway landing zone width for both the scratch and bogey player is measured at 40 yards wide. The bogey player is forced to lay up on the second shot to the landing zone fairway width of 27 yards. What is the fairway ratings for the male scratch and bogey players? So a lot of things going on right there. So for a 450-yard hole, we're going to use the bottom row for men in the fairway rating table. And a 40-yard fairway gives a table value of 3 for both bogey and scratch off that tee shot. Bogey is forced to lay up, though, on their second shot to a 27-yard wide fairway, which gives a table value of 5. However, as the bogey player is forced to lay up, you will notice that the first adjustment there in fairway is the L adjustment, and which we're going to apply that, and that brings that final value for that second landing zone for that bogey player to a 4. Now, as you know, bogey has 2 landing zones, but based on the length of the hole, scratch only had that initial landing zone that we talked about that was 40 yards wide. They didn't have to lay up. Their second shot was into the center of the green, as you know, based on the shot length tables that are in the front of the guide. And so based on the only landing zone for the scratch player, which is 40 yards wide, and then based on the second landing zone that you had to lay up for the bogey player, we get our final values of 3 and 4 for scratch and bogey respectively. So letter answer D is your final answer. I'm guessing if some of you who may have missed this may have forgot about that that L adjustment for that bogey player because they are laying up, and it is a shot specific. Adjustment, and that occurred in that landing zone, so we would apply it in that instance. So, John, what questions, if any, do we have?
No questions here on question 7.
All right, question number 8. Just so we know, we had less than 50% get this question right, so we're certainly going to go over this question, with a little more detail, just so that we understand the thought process and where everything's coming along. So, on a 270-yard hole, par 4 hole for women, the female bogey player cannot reach the fairway, and their only landing zone is 2-inch cool season grass, rough. While the scratch lays up by choice to a landing zone that is about 25 yards wide. What are the final fairway ratings for both the scratch and bogey female player? So certainly a lot going on here. The fairway landing zone is about 25 yards wide, which indicates, the tweener table value for that scratch player. So if you go to the table there and you go over to the less than 20 yards, right? 20 to 24, excuse me. Yeah, 20 to 24, excuse me. You'll see that there's that table value there of, between the three, between the 25 and 29 and the 20 to 24, there's a jump between there, between 3 and 5. So just like if I were to measure the fairway there at 25 and Scott were to measure that fairway at 24, they're really close to that example right there. We would want to use a tweener value, and that's what we were trying to go toward with that tweener value. The L1 applies for that scratch female player for the layup by choice also. Since bogey landing zone is not in the fairway, but in the rough, right, we're going to use the less than 20 column, so that table value is a 6, right? That table value is going to be a 6 for that bogey player. We're not going to use the player cannot play, we're not going to use the bogey player can't complete the hole procedure, because the bogey's landing zone is what I would call normal rough, normal 2-inch rough. They aren't ending up in a penalty area where they literally can't play the hole. They can play from the rough, the 2-inch cool season grass. It may be a little more difficult, but it's certainly you're able to play there. Other obstacles or EPLs may be affected, like roll, but when we're talking about the fairway only, we're going to use the less than 20-inch column, and in this circumstance, 20-yard column. And so that brings our final values to letter D would be the correct answer for both the final ratings of 3 and 6. And if you look at this in another example, if that fairway for bogey were 10 yards wide, for example, we would still use that less than 20 column for fairway, just so it makes sense that, for a fairway that isn't there, we're going to use that less than 20 column, and then the bogey then can play the hole from there, although they are playing it certainly from the rough. What's that? Also, we can talk about the W adjustments that could be there. Certainly if the question had talked about light rough, or and it indicated something that the hole could just easily be played from the rough as it is in the fairway. Certainly looking at using the W-1 or W-2 could certainly be in play. However, with it being from 2-inch cool season grass and a bogey player, regardless of gender, scratch or male, having to hit another shot into a green, certainly difficult for these players. So, not applying the W adjustment is, why we didn't apply that W adjustment, either one of them. We wanted to make sure that we gave you that 2-inch rough, that cool season grass is being played from, and that certainly didn't indicate that we should use the W adjustment. So that's how we got to our final letter of 3-6 for our final answer for letter D. What questions do we have, John, on that one?
No questions at the moment.
All right, sounds good. Question number 9. moving right along here. And on this question, just over 60% got it correct. So a little under the national average, but that's why we're here to continue to learn. On a 480-yard hole for men that has a green that measures 18 yards wide by 38 yards deep, due to a downhill approach shot, the rating team has determined that a scratch player will reach the center of the green in 2 shots significantly more than half the time. What is the green target rating for the scratch player? So certainly several things going on there. Since the depth is greater than 2 times the width, the effective green diameter is calculated as such. We're taking 2 of the low values, which are the 18s. We're going to take 1 of the large value of the 38, and we're going to divide that number by 3, and that gives us a EGD of 25. As the hole is in transition, as you know, right there for a 480-yard hole, for those of you who have been rating, that's smack dab in the middle of transition zone for the scratch male player. Right there is a 480-yard hole. So as the hole is in transition, the green target table value is 5. And where do we find that? In the column 4 right there, which is 22 to 26. All the way at the bottom, where it says 50-50 transition zone rating value, we get the 5. And just if you're a newer rater, how do we get that 5? Well, that's just the average of the top row there, which is the 2, and the bottom row, which is 7, and that's how we get the 5 there. That's our average right there. That's how we get that transition zone value right there. As the male scratch player is deemed to be able to reach the center of the green in 2 shots significantly more than half the time, 1 additional point is added. Now you also notice, at the bottom of the rating table there for green target, you'll also have that note, plus the guide on page 4 talks about this as well in the transition zone, that once we know that this player can reach the center of the green significantly more times than it won't, then we can add a point to that transition zone table value from 5 to make it a 6 in this instant. So that's where we get the final value of 6, letter D, for this question. And something else to consider is, I'm guessing some people that that didn't add the point. Remember, based on the size of this green, the front of the green starts at 461 yards, and that's just half. Taking 9 yards off the center, which is 480. So when you think about it, or 18, or 19 from the 38, right? So when you think about it, they're already landing 9 yards onto the green, and we know as that scratch player is hitting a long shot into it, they're hitting, whether it's a hybrid or a longer iron into that green, ball's going to roll out a little bit more. So certainly that roll on that green is going to consider that. So plus it was downhill as well as the question mentioned. So that's where we get the final value of letter D for 6. Any questions on that one, John?
No questions here.
All right, last one from me, and then I'll turn it over to Scott again. On a 137-yard par 3 hole for women, the green is 32 yards wide by 16 deep, but also qualifies as tiered. What are the green target ratings for scratch female and bogey players? So this is certainly a 2-to-1 exactly on the number green. So trying to throw you a little bit of a curveball. In order for it, just like the last green, to qualify, it has to be greater than 2-to-1. But since it's right on the numbers, 16 is exactly half of 32. We just do the normal averaging procedure for getting the effective green diameter. So the effective green diameter here is 24. Looking in that column 4 again for the green target table. The approach shot for the scratched woman is 137 yards, and that gives us a table value of 5. The approach shot for the bogey woman, which is the same because we're starting at the tee, is also 137 yards, and that gives us a table value of 7. So we've got our 5, we've got our 7. Now we've got to look at whether or not adjustments qualify for this hole, right? Do any adjustments qualify for this hole? Well, we see that we do have that tier that's in the adjustments there that the tier adjustment also applies to both the scratch and bogey players. Now, as some of you know who have been rating for a while on green surface, the tiers don't apply to both, but we'll certainly get to that later on. But under green target, tiers are applied to both the scratch and bogey players. So they both qualify. So those 5s and 7s become 6s and 8s. So our final value for scratch and bogey are 6 and 8, so letter C, after adjustments are taken into account. What questions do we have, John?
Still no questions at the moment.
All right, good. A couple things before I keep going. One is that we do put a couple challenging questions in these quizzes. We want to see a couple questions where only 50, 60, 70% of people get it right, so we can kind of challenge those who really do know the system and those who don't kind of figure out something new. But also these questions are a little bit subjective in some ways. There's not always a perfect answer. So at our national calibration seminars, we will sometimes let our attendees kind of sway our mind and change our answer. But in this case, I think most of these answers are pretty straightforward. So moving along here. So question number 11. A par 5 hole measures 420 yards for women with an average warm season rough of 1 1/4 inches. There's a 122-yard carry over the 1 1/4 inch rough from the tee to reach the first landing zone. In the bogey second landing zone, there are significant mounds 15 yards from the edge of the fairway on both sides. The green target for bogey is 4. What is the R&R rating for the female bogey player? So the first thing we typically do when under any obstacles, look at the table value. So we've already given you the green target value of 4, and we've given you that the rough is 1 1/4 inch warm season. So for a bogey woman player, that's going to give us an R&R table value of 5. Now we look at adjustments. The first one is that 122-yard carry over the 1 1/4 inch warm season rough. That barely qualifies. Anything under 120 wouldn't have got this adjustment, but because it's over 120, it does get the +1 adjustment for carry. And then we look at the mounds adjustment. Now, what might have thrown a few people off is that it says there are mounds on both sides of the fairway. Mounds is a shot-specific adjustment, but that means it can be applied once per shot. It can't be applied twice on the same shot in terms of having mounds on both sides versus on one side. There is a +2 mounds adjustment, but that's not related to whether it's on both sides. It's related to the severity of the mounds at the green. So in this case, it's just a single +1 adjustment for mounds. So the final rating then for R&R is the 5 from the table plus the 2 points of adjustment is a 7. So the answer then is C, 7. And this one, just over half, about 55% of the people, attendees got this one right. So not sure if it was the mounds adjustment that tripped a few people up, because the carry and the table value for R&R were pretty straightforward. So I'm guessing it was the mounds adjustment that a couple people either put a +2 or maybe didn't put it at all. Remember, mounds in the fairway just need to be near the landing zone, which is within 20 yards. In this case, they are. At the green, they have to be closely bordering, which is within 10. So some people might have mixed that up and thought it had to be within 10 yards of the edge of the fairway to get a mounds adjustment. So a couple answers of 6, couple answers of 8 are the common ones when people missed it. So. Okay, any questions on this one, John?
Yeah, one question here kind of led into it. Well, is there a distance where the mounds don't come into play from the center of the fairway?
Yeah, so I just mentioned it a little bit. So anything that's what we call near the fairway landing zone, so it's got to be within 20 yards of the edge of the fairway in any direction, forward, backwards, left, and right, would be considered near. So if it's more than that, if it's 25, 30, now we no longer qualify for the mounds adjustment. And that's just straight from the table or straight from the adjustments. It uses the word near, and near is defined in the definitions, and that the green is closely bordering, which is defined as well, which is less than 10 yards. So, any other questions, John?
We do have one other question here. I just want to have, as a note here, I noticed a couple of people in the audience are using the raise hand feature. We are not going to be able to unmute attendees during the call today, so if you do have any questions, please put them in writing in the questions tab, and we'll read them out here and go through them as well. But so one other question on question 11 here: do significant mounds equal a +2 adjustment?
So good question. So if you look at it, so under mounds, there's the +1. It just says if grass mounds or hollows are present near the fairway landing zone, that's pretty much all you can do in the fairway. When you get to the green is where you can apply an additional point and say it's a +2 if the grass mounds are severe. It's a +1, and actually if they're significant at the green, if they're severe, then it can actually be a +2. So there is no +2 option in the fairway landing zones, only at the green. So, okay, moving along here. Question number 12. This one was pretty well done. About 70% of people got this one right. So just about that average we see in many of our quizzes. A par 3 hole measures 245 yards for the men with an average cool season rough of 1¼ inches. Severe mounds, I just talked about them, but severe mounds closely border the left and right side of the circular green with an effective diameter of 30 yards. There's a fairway that extends back 50 yards from the front of the green that is 25 yards wide. The green target ratings are 6 for scratch and 3 for bogey. What are our R&R ratings? So the first thing we do is look at our table value. So we gave you the answers to those 2 questions in terms of how to determine it. Green target of 6 and 3, 1¼ inch cool season rough, and that gives us an R&R table value for the scratch and male bogey players of 3 and 2. Then we look at adjustments. The first one, those severe mounds, like I just mentioned. At the green, if there are severe mounds, we can actually add 2 points of adjustment in this case. So the severe mounds closely bordering both sides of the green would definitely qualify as a +2 adjustment. So we're going to add 2 points to both scratch and bogey since they come into play for both players. However, the bogey has an additional adjustment because the bogey golfer cannot reach this green in one shot and has to hit a second shot to the green from about 45 yards away. We have what's called the 3 adjustment, which is named after the par 3. This is always in play if the bogey golfer cannot reach the center of the green. Other than transition, which we have a submitted question about this, which was a good one. But in this case, the player has 0 chance of getting on the green. So we're going to apply an adjustment. Now, it's a +1 if that area short of the green is at least 20 yards wide and cut to fairway height. And that's the case here. It's 25 yards wide, so it's definitely more than 20. We're going to apply the +1. If it was less than 20, we would actually have a +2 adjustment for this adjustment. So, but the +1 is all that applies here. So the bogey gets an extra point. So our final ratings then are 5 for scratch and 5 for bogey, which is answer B. Okay, no questions, it looks like. On a short par 4 hole, fairway bunkers with extreme features that may limit the player's recovery distance are near the tee shot landing zone for both the scratch and bogey player. Greenside bunkers closely border 2/3 of the green and are 7 feet deep. The green target rating is 5 for scratch and 6 for bogey. What are the bunker ratings for scratch and bogey? You'll notice in this question we didn't specify men or women, because it doesn't matter. Whether you rated it for men or women, the answer was going to be the same. So the first thing we look at is the table value. So we have a green target of 5 for scratch and 6 for bogey. 2/3 of the green surrounded by bunkers, closely bordered, equates to between 1/2 and 3/4, and that gives us a table value of 5 and 6. Now, we do have fairway bunkers, as it says, and the fairway bunkers are actually considered extreme. So the fairway bunkers existing means we don't apply the N-1 adjustment. However, because they're extreme, we have a choice of either a +1 or a +2 extreme adjustment. Now, the +1 adjustment just talks about fairway bunkers or bunkers being extreme, difficult to recover from, etc. The +2 talks about a player having to go out sideways or backwards, where they're severely extreme, if that's a term. In this case, it just says it's limiting their recovery distance. It's not reducing it or eliminating it. It's not making them go sideways or backwards. So we didn't want you to use the +2 extreme adjustment, but definitely the +1. And then there's also that depth at the green. At the green, those bunkers being 7 feet deep qualifies a +2 depth adjustment for both scratch and bogey. And that gives us a final rating then for scratch of 8, the 5 off the table, plus a point for extreme, plus 2 points for depth. And for the bogey, starting at a 6, plus the 1, plus the 2 additional, gives us a final value of 9. So answer is E, 8, 9. Any questions there?
We actually have a couple of questions going back to the previous question, to question 12.
Yep.
First off, I think we might have just skipped the percentage of people who got question 10.
Yeah, sometimes I say at the beginning and sometimes I say at the end, so you might have missed it. But on question number, what was it, 11?
Or 10 and 12.
Oh, 10 was 85%. That was one that Matt did. And then number 12, which is when we just finished up, I said it was 70%, right about that average. This particular question, number 13, was pretty high. It's actually 85%. So most people got this one right. Only a handful of people didn't.
Great. And then just going back, if we could, to question 12, there was a question whether is there a carry adjustment in this question
Which one?
on 12.
No, it doesn't say anything about the 1 1/4 inch cool season. It wouldn't qualify. It's got to be deeper than that to qualify. So there's a carry adjustment under R&R. So if you look at it, it's not gonna. It's gonna be in that very bottom category. So it's not gonna qualify. So.
Yes, and the correct answer to question 12 was answer B there.
Okay.
But we are good to move on to question 14.
All right. Where are we at here? 14. This one, I'll go over the number of people correct first. This one wasn't as well done as others. This one was just under 50% of people got it right. This was one of those we really wanted to challenge people to think about, how the system works. So we're not surprised, I guess, that not as many people got this one right. But on a 280-yard hole for men, the only bunker on the hole is a 4-foot deep bunker that closely borders the entire front of the green. That is 22 yards wide and 30 yards deep. The greenside bunker fraction is less than 1/4, and the green target ratings are 2 for scratch and 4 for bogey. What are the bunker ratings for the male scratch and bogey player? So first we look at the table value. Again, we gave you the information to get the table, which is the green targets and the bunker fraction of less than 1/4. That gives us a bunker rating table of 1 for scratch and 3 for bogey. Now, the scratch landing zone is near a greenside bunker. However, this acts as a fairway bunker for the scratch golfer. This is, again, straight out of the book. When it talks about the N-1 adjustment, it says greenside bunkers do not count as fairway bunkers unless the player has a landing zone just short of the green and the greenside bunkers are near that landing zone. This hole is only 280 yards long for a scratch male golfer. The green is 30 yards deep. That means from the middle of the green to the front of the green is 15 yards. So the beginning of those bunkers are ending at 265 yards, which means that if they're still already near the 250-yard end of the tee shot landing zone. And that's if they're just a couple yards wide. So they're definitely near the tee shot landing zone. So the scratch golfer does not get the N adjustment. However, this is one of those few instances where the scratch doesn't get it, but the bogey does. The bogey player is way back, 80 yards back, hitting a shot into the green from nowhere near that bunker that's in front of the green. So they do not have a fairway bunker on this hole. So it can happen where the scratch golfer gets a fairway bunker, but a bogey golfer does not. And this is one of those few cases where this can happen. That greenside bunker does not act as a fairway bunker unless, again, the player has a landing zone near that greenside bunker. We do have a depth adjustment of +1 for both players. So it's 4-foot deep bunker, which qualifies as a +1. And then we also have a carry adjustment. Because that bunker closely borders the entire front of the green, that means to get to any part of the green, the player would have to go over that bunker. We have a carry adjustment. However, for scratch, it doesn't apply. Scratch needs a 5 green target or greater to qualify, only has a 2 straight from the question itself, but bogey golfer gets it no matter what. So the C+1 applies to the bogey. We add all those adjustments up to the table values that we started with, and our final rating then is 2 for scratch and 4 for bogey, letter B. Questions?
None at the moment.
All right. Last one for me, and then back over to Matt to wrap us up with the quiz. On a par 5 hole for women, the tee shot must be hit 100 yards to safely carry a large pond, which is designated as a penalty area, with no recovery options, which means they're going back to basically the tee to hit their next shot. On the second full shot, heavy extreme rough must be crossed. That requires a shot of 95 yards to safely carry. A ball in the extreme rough will almost certainly be lost. What is the crossing obstacle rating for the female bogey player? So looking at the tee shot, a 100-yard crossing obstacle table value for a female bogey player is going to give us a 5. The second shot over the extreme rough of 95 yards is also going to give us a 5. we take the higher the two values normally. However, when both values are 5 or greater, 2 5s or greater add up to be additional points, which is that 2 adjustment. The number 2, which means it comes into play 2 or more shots. Because they both are 5 or greater and they add up to be 10 points, we add an additional point to the higher value, which in this case, the higher value is 5, which is the same, plus the 1 additional point gives us a final rating of 6. Most people got this one right. It's right at about 75%, again, kind of that expected average. The people who didn't, I'm assuming that some of them might have thought that there was a K adjustment. K adjustment does not exist on the crossing obstacle category. Whether they get over or don't get over, they're pretty much hitting their next shot from the same spot. So the 2 5s just become a 6, or some people might have just forgot about the 2 adjustment and just left the answer as B5. But the answer is C, 6. Questions?
Yes, one on question 15 here. Does almost certainly to be lost indicate 75%?
Yeah, that's not a bad question because, we wanted to say almost certainly meaning like 99%. Some people could take that as meaning like, well, 75% or more is still pretty certain, but we didn't want you to reduce that value at all. So if any of you thought that almost certainly represented maybe 75% and reduced that 5 down to a 4 on the second shot and came up with a final rating then of 5 because of that, you're not wrong. It's just sometimes we have to assume people are reading it the same way we wrote it or interpreting it the same way, but almost certainly in our minds was like 99%. Like it's pretty much a lost ball almost every time. So, but 75% would have given you 1 less point and would change the answer. So good question there.
And we do have one question going back to question 14, if we're able to. Just kind of an explanation regarding near the landing zone on that hole.
Yeah, so there's definitions at the beginning of the guide which have some 2 definitions in particular that are important to know, which is one is the word near and one is the phrase closely bordering. Near means it's within 20 yards. An obstacle is straight off the book. An obstacle or condition is considered near a landing zone or green if it's within 20 yards in any direction of the outside perimeter of a landing zone or edge of the green. So some adjustments require the situation or the condition to be near, and some require it to be closely bordering, which is within 10 yards of the edge of the green or the edge of the fairway. So those 2 terms, they have specific definitions that are, that mean something in terms of the distances. So hopefully that helps. All right, I just keep going.
Okay.
We got to go.
Alrighty. Thanks, Scott, for that explanation. We'll move on to question number 16, which according to, we got about just under 70% got it right. So a little under the average, but certainly a lot going on in this question. So we'll go over each landing zone. On a 350-yard hole for men that has a penalty area 35 yards from the center of the fairway along the entire left-hand side of the hole. A 5-yard wide concrete maintenance road runs along the penalty area for the entire left side of the hole from tee all the way past the green. At the green, there is also out of bounds to the right, 20 yards lateral from the center of the green. What are the lateral obstacle ratings values for both male scratch and bogey players? So certainly a lot going on, and we'll certainly go over each landing zone for each player. So the tee shot lateral value for 35 yards from the center of the fairway, that's what COF stands for, center of fairway. For scratch and bogey, we get 3s, and that's straight off the table. We haven't looked at anything else. Full tee shots for both scratch and bogey, and we've got the column between 30 and 39. We're going to almost right in the middle there. That is a value of 3 for both players. That comes straight from the table. Next, because we've got that concrete road that runs alongside the penalty area on the entire left side, we're going to add that B+1 adjustment for that road for both the scratch and bogey players. Certainly, if I hit the ball left or anyone hits the ball left and it hits that road, it's almost certainly going to, trampoline out of bounds there because of hitting that concrete path. So certainly it's, necessary to give additional point values for that player, for both those players there in those scenarios, right? So we've got 2 4s there for our first landing zone for both players. The approach shot lateral values are 20 yards from the green for scratch and bogey are 2 and 4. And how do we get those 2 and 4? Well, we certainly have the entire, we know the length of the hole measures 350 yards. So based on that, we know that we have 150 yards left for bogey and 100 yards for scratch into the center of the green, just based on, the front of the guide has our baseline for shot lengths for both players. So 250 from 350 for scratch is 100, and 200 less from 350 for bogey is 150. So looking at that, we have a 150-yard shot into a lateral into the out of bounds. It's in the center of the green from 150 for bogey. We certainly get a 4 there, and then we're going to add the K adjustment that you see there, which brings it to a 5, because it's met the condition for the K adjustment, right? It's, based on the table value plus adjustments above, the K adjustment applied. So that's where we get the 5 from. The scratch player, right, has only 100 yards into the center of the green with that 20-yard lateral out of bounds there on the right-hand side. And so that value becomes a 2, right? Then that's straight off the table going into the column that reads 90 to 129. And going into 20 to 29, we get a 2. Now we also get to add the K adjustment there because it certainly met the criteria for table value plus adjustment. So that 2 and 4 becomes 3 and 5 respectively. So how do we do this? We get sort of like the previous questions at the beginning where we had 2 different values. Which value do we take? Well, we're going to take the highest values from each landing zone. So the highest landing zone values for scratch are the 4 from the tee shot and 5 for bogey from that approach shot. So those are going to be our final values right there for both scratch and bogey for this hole on the lateral obstacle ratings are going to be 4 and 5, which answer E would be our correct answer. John, were there any questions on question 16?
No questions here.
Excellent. Like I said, just under 70% got it. So a lot of items going on in this question. So certainly understand where somebody may have got confused. Certainly with the question. On question 17, we had a very good outcome. 90% got this question right. So maybe just breeze through this as most of you got this right. On a long par 4 hole, there's a chute on the tee shot that measures 17 yards wide by 129 yards to clear that chute. The scratch player is determined to have significant problems with the trees, while the bogey player is determined to have moderate to significant problems. What are the trees ratings for both the scratch and bogey player? Well, the tree rating table value that we take a look at, this is definitely a 2 or more shot hole because we see it's a long par 4 hole. We're going to use the bottom row to find our values. And just looking at the table value to start off with on a 2 or more shot hole with significant problems for the scratch player is a 6. The trees rating table value for bogey on a 2 or more greater shot hole with moderate to significant problems is a 5. It's that tweener value. It's a little bit more than moderate, but not quite significant like our scratch value. So our value for bogey is going to go with 5. Now we have that as our baseline. Do we have any adjustments? Well, we do know at the beginning of the question, we've got a chute that's 17 yards wide and 129 yards to clear that chute. So if we go to the tee shot chute table and we go to the row that's 17 to 18, and we find the column that best measures that 129 or that falls in that range, we see that range is there is a +2. So our 6s and 5s become +2s on those adjustments. So we add 2 to each value. So our 6s and 5s become 8 and 7 for our final value, which is letter C. We're going to add 2 points to the table value right there. So John, any questions on that one?
No questions here, Matt.
Excellent. Moving on to question number 18, which just under 50% got this question right on this green surface question. So we'll certainly go over it. On the rating team has determined an average green speed of 10 feet 3 inches on a course. The first green qualifies as tiered with a 4-foot high ramp in between 2 tiers that are both relatively flat. what are the green surface ratings for both the scratch and bogey player? Okay, so we know that the green speed is 10 feet 3 inches, which falls right into the row of green speed of 10 feet to 10 feet 11 inches. So we're going to work off of that. A tiered green, you will note, is always considered at least moderately contoured, even if each tier is flat. See the note at the note number 2 at the foot of the green surface rating table. So certainly, what may have thrown some people off is where we talk about each tier is relatively flat. Well, that may be the case, but based on what we know as what the default is for any tiered green is, it's at least going to use the moderately contoured middle column there as a baseline. The green surface table value for green speed of 10 feet 3 inches on a moderately contoured green is 7 and 8, right? So that's just moderately contoured on a 10 foot 3 inch green speed is 7 and 8 respectively for scratch and bogey there. And for those who are new, that 7 there within the table is the scratch value, and then in the parentheses is what our bogey value will be, just if you're a newer rater and aren't sure why those parentheses are within the table. What we're going to do is we're going to add a T plus 1 to the bogey player only, as a tiered green surface only applies to that bogey player and not scratch. The final green surface rating for these scratch and bogey players, is the 7 based off the table for the scratch player and 9 based on the 8 table value plus the T adjustment for the bogey player. So final answer for that one is letter D, 7 and 9. John, any questions?
No questions here on question 18.
All right, sounds good. All right, this one is another true-false question. Almost 90% of you got it right, so certainly really good job. So the extraordinary judgment can be applied to all bogey players. The extraordinary judgment only applies to bogey women's ratings, and that's straight out of the guide on page 39. So the answer is false. Just wanted to note that within the system, the software actually calculates this for you. This is more of just an awareness for you raters that this extraordinary adjustment is applied during the back-end calculations. The individual going out there and rating the golf course would never apply this, on your forms that your AGAs provide you when you do your rating. So just wanted to more or less make you all aware that this extraordinary adjustment is done on the back end for you already and is auto-calculate, just like psychological is in general. So I just wanted to make mention of that. John, questions?
No questions here.
Perfect. All right, the last question, more of a statement, I guess. It's an adjustment for obstacle squeeze using that Q adjustment may be applied when, letter A, when the fairway bunkers are 32 yards apart on both sides of a landing zone. Well, we know that's incorrect because we wouldn't use that because they need to be at least within 30 yards on both sides of the landing zone. So we know that letter A can't be correct. Letter B, out of bounds, 21 yards left, and penalty area 18 yards right of the center of the landing zone. So we know that between the two, those are 39 yards apart. So the lateral obstacles, which include OB and penalty areas, are within that 40-yard limit that fall under lateral obstacles. So we get a check mark there saying we can use that. The greenside bunkers are 28 yards apart on both sides of the green for letter C. The squeeze for bunkers does not apply at the green, so we know that can't be right. We look at letter D. The trees closely border both sides of a landing zone. Well, there is no squeeze adjustment under trees, only under bunkers and lateral obstacles. And letter E just says none of the above, which we know that can't be true either because letter B was true. So our final answer is B as the correct answer and cannot, because E cannot be the correct answer. So any last questions on that before I pass it over for the submitted questions from Scott?
No more questions here. We could go on to our submitted questions.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Gives us about 30 minutes to kind of go through the any submitted questions that we had in advance and anything that popped up during the session here. And then we'll, again, save about 5 minutes at the end to do some education updates. Matt and I are going to kind of alternate these submitted questions as we go, but we'll probably both chime in on some of them if we have thoughts. So thanks for those who took the time to ask these questions. These are the type of things we like to get in advance because we like to, some of them are, things we have to think about or maybe run by a committee member or a committee to see if, if they have thoughts on it. So, but going right into them, first question is very long, so I won't read the whole thing, but essentially it's saying like, we have very large greens, significantly larger than the largest, category, often results in low green targets, also means low R&R and bunker ratings, but it doesn't reflect the true challenge. Having those really large greens can be very difficult to putt on, especially if they're fast. Really good question. The reason I say that is because this has been on our course rating committee agenda probably at least 5 times since I've been on staff. We've discussed it at length. We have made a couple small tweaks to the system to account for this. One of them is that we have eliminated the highest green target or effective green diameter column that was in the old system. So we used to have a greater than 36-yard column. We eliminated that. So we said anything 31 or greater, if you look in the new book, is the highest possible category in terms of like, the lowest rating. Which means that any green that's above 31 is going to get the same rating, whether it's 31, 41, 51, 101, all going to get the same. We're not going to continue to lower green target ratings as greens get larger than 31. Once it gets to 31, we're going to kind of cap it and keep it at that number. So it does, like I said, it doesn't necessarily increase those greens, but it doesn't decrease those. But we have been looking at some other potential adjustments down the road, maybe something that includes, something to green surface or something to another category, but we wouldn't probably touch the green target rating. We have done research on this, and when I say it's come up 4 or 5 times in past committee meetings, we often do go back to that research that was done that basically says that no matter what, for the most part, 90+% of the time, you're better off on the green than being in a bunker or in the rough. What that means is that it wouldn't make sense to say we're going to treat a large green as more difficult than a green that's smaller, that has bunkers and rough that are in the same area that the green would be if it was any larger. So being 40 or 50 feet away or 100 feet away from a hole on the green is still going to give you a better chance of scoring than 40, 50, or 100 feet away in a bunker or in the green side rough. So that's kind of been our go-to for why we haven't really done much about this. Again, being on the green is almost always a better option than not being on the green, because again, if you got that long putt, you hit the ball to the same spot on a smaller green, it's going to be in the rough or in a bunker. It's not like the ball is all of a sudden going to be closer to the hole because it's a smaller green. It's still going to be the same distance. It's just in a worse situation. So hopefully that answered the question. Matt, you want to take the next one?
Sounds good, Scott. Would you be able to provide some examples for percentage recoverability for lateral penalty areas, i.e. what does 25% recoverable look like versus 75% recoverable? So it's certainly difficult to provide pictures and examples because there's so many different types of examples that we don't want to pigeonhole anybody into thinking one way or another, that can show this. Best way to look at this is if you come to that penalty area or even extreme rough, certainly take a look and see if a player can first find their ball. And if it comes to rest in that issue, whether it's a penalty area or extreme rough, once it's determined that the ball can be found, addressing how hard it would be to find it and then play plus advance the ball, should be taken into account. So if determined that, by your team that only 25% of the time the player will find the ball, play it from there, and and advance it from its position, certainly use 75% of the, for the percentage adjustment of the table value plus any of the other adjustments that you have already indicated that are in play there, for example. So conditions to consider: how thick the rough is it patchy in some areas but open in others? Is the creek, if it's a creek, dry or has very little water in it? Also, how much of the penalty area is near that landing zone and its positioning, if it's, only stops halfway into your landing zone, certainly those are some considerations to take into account for using, how much of the lateral penalty area in this case is near the landing zone. So certainly some considerations to take into place. That's why it's hard to just say, just show up 3 or 4 pictures on a screen and say, oh, this is what to look for. It's a little bit more complicated than just saying, just showing you 3 or 4 pictures because of just so many different, issues that come up in so many different parts of the country. So I hope that helped answer your question.
All right, next one here. These were 3 questions asked by the same person, but they're all fairly straightforward, so I'll answer all 3 of them here. First one, can we put a player in a bunker instead of using a forced layup? The answer to that would generally be no. You're not going to purposely put a player in a bunker and say we're going to measure the fairway width and the topography and all that stuff from a bunker, but you could certainly and more likely put them as a layup by choice. So, a bunker does not always cause a forced layup, but it should certainly be something that you would look at as a layup by choice. So a very, very shallow, easy to recover from bunker. While the player could hit the ball in there, probably could play it out of there pretty easily, you'd still put in some sort of layup by choice if it was that close to the landing zone and really for a full shot would get him there. But it's definitely not a forced layup unless it's a severe type obstacle, like a deep bunker, 4, 5, 6, 8 feet deep, where it might cost them a shot or a half shot at least. So second one, is it reasonable to assume, now I wasn't quite sure on this one, but is it reasonable to assume a player hits a layup shot to a yardage that is between a full tee shot and a subsequent full shot? And I think by using the word reasonable, the question might be, can a player really lay up by just a very small amount? We have this 250-yard for men or 210-yard for women full tee shot. Their subsequent shots are 220 and 190. So when they're hitting like a 5 or a 10 or a 15-yard layup, is it reasonable to think that they can do that? And the answer is yes. I mean, players can take a little bit off a full tee shot. They can choke up. They can not swing as hard, et cetera. So there's not a problem with having a layup that's not either a full layup or a full shot. It can be between a full 3-wood and a full driver, if I guess that's the case. So hopefully that was the question. And then the last one, 208-yard or 158-yard par 3 hole, so a bogey transition of 8 yards. Is the R&R 3 adjustment applicable only if the player lays up? No transition zone, or does it apply to the transition zone only? So this would get back to our transition zone concept where we've changed this. I know a lot of you haven't really familiarized yourself with the 2020 book. Maybe you haven't done a lot of rating the last 2 years due to COVID and just not having the same ability or the same opportunities to get out. But basically in 2020, we changed it so that transition is really a single decision. Is the player getting there 50% or more or less than 50% of the time? If they're getting there 50% or more, we're going to treat it as if they get there every time in terms of the procedure. We're just going to rate it as the long shot. We're not going to find some sort of landing zone short of the green. But if the player is getting there less than 50% of the time, that's where we're going to find a spot short of the green and evaluate an additional landing zone. So really in this answer, it depends on whether the transition is 50-50 or less than 50-50. So if it's at least 50-50, 50% or greater, there would not be another landing zone. And now we're not going to use the 3 adjustment in that case. But if the team felt like the player was going to get there less than 50% of the time, then that 3 adjustment would apply on top of any other adjustments. It would be short of the green as well. So hopefully that answers those 3 questions. All right, Matt.
Okay, the next one that was submitted was kind of a 2-parter. So both of them are pretty straightforward. The first one is if a table crossing value is 0, but the crossing is to the green with the edge less than 10 yards from that hazard, does the player still get a value of 1 for the crossing adjustment? The player has a lateral hazard values rating. I assume they mean lateral penalty area values rating on the hole. So to answer this first question, the first part of your question, the answer is yes. The carry adjustment is going to be used in this scenario and would apply. This would just mean that you would get a final value with a crossing value of a 1 in this case, and then whatever your lateral value would become, based on how the hole was played, etc. You would also get another value for both players for the lateral obstacle. So the answer is yes. In this instance, even though you get a 0 off the table, you still apply that +1 carry and that will give you a 1 for both players for a release. Yeah, the 1 for both players. So, and then you would just go with your lateral values, whatever you get based on how the hole is played and the length of the hole, etc. The second question was, if a player lays up, but the shot is not used to determine his or her fairway value, does she still get an L adjustment for R&R? The asterisk implies that it is shot specific. So this statement / question is correct. The fairway layup value will not be used regarding the adjustment because it is shot specific in fairway, meaning the fairway that we're using was not affected or impacted by that layup that occurred for the player. However, because in R&R, shot specific adjustments are cumulative, the layup would apply to this player, and thus, whatever that final value for R&R you get to, you would need to subtract 1 point for the layup adjustment in that category. So good questions on that. Pass it back over to Scott.
All right, and this was the last set or last slide of the submitted questions, and I know we do have a few that were written in during the seminar today. We'll get to as well. So this is all about surrounds, and the first one is the surround rating shot specific. On page 33, it does not have an asterisk, but in the adjustment code table it does. Short answer to this is that was a typo. Basically, the surround adjustment is shot specific. It only applies to the shot to the green. So what happens on previous shots if you have a shot over, a lateral water or lateral penalty area, whatever, lateral obstacle on a tee shot, but it's nowhere near the green, you wouldn't apply that surround adjustment on top of that number, if that was the higher of the two. So, but the good thing about it is that the way that the surround adjustment is worded, it does say that's specific to a shot to the green. So when you get to the green, it just says the surround adjustment right off the bat says, if the green is closely surrounded by crossing. So you're not applying a surround adjustment to a lateral shot that's not to the green. So while it doesn't have the asterisk there, it should be pretty obvious that it's a shot-specific adjustment. The second one, is there a proper way to determine it? Which, again, this is a good question because, we don't always lay out in the book how to do it. But essentially, like, how do we use the surrounding area of the green and how do we measure it? Is it the average distance from the edge of the green? Is it the closest? Is it, how do we do that? So as it says, for instance, the edge of the green is 3 yards from the hazard, and using the word hazard, I assume penalty area at one point, and gradually increases to 10 yards. What if part of the surround perimeter increases to 11? So the answer essentially is that anything that's within the 10 yards. So if it gets to be more than 10 yards, it no longer counts towards that surround percentage or that surround fraction, if you want to call it that. So we're not really averaging it. So you couldn't say that, for half of it's 3, half of it's 11, the average is, 7. That doesn't work. You can't say 100% of it's surrounded by an average of 7 yards. It's the areas that are within 10 yards count for the less than 10, and the areas that are less than 5 count for the less than 5. You don't want to use an average of 2 areas to kind of include a larger area. So with that said, there are some times when you might average a surround that changes from less than 5 to greater than 5. Like maybe part of it's less than 5 and it's, up to a third, but then another part of it is 5 to 10, but it's not quite half. Like you might have a total surround of +1 when maybe it didn't qualify either way. Like it wasn't quite enough to get it one way, it wasn't quite enough to get the other, but between the two, maybe it gets there. So there are times when that's just a subjective judgment call. And then the second part of this, does bounce enter into the evaluation since it's applied first? For example, if it's an 11 yards, but there's a bounce, would it be less than that? And the answer to that's absolutely yes. There is some language on this on the lateral obstacles page. It's the second to last bullet on the left in the middle section where it says fraction of the green closely surrounded by lateral obstacles. Consider conditions that can decrease or increase the likelihood of a lateral obstacle closely border the green coming into play. So for example, a downslope or a bounce. So it could be 11 yards from the edge of the green to the penalty area, but if that's downslope or there's something that would cause the ball to get in there quicker than it would otherwise, you can certainly count that as being less than 10. It's kind of like the effective distance it is to the penalty area. So you could have it 11 yards from the edge and be considered less than 5, because if it just goes right over the edge, it might go into the penalty area every single time. And then we're just basically saying that's less than 5 effectively. So hopefully that answers the question. And there's one more that Matt's going to cover before we get to our last bit of questions.
So clarification on when a player can't reach the fairway. The last webinar said to use the highest fairway rating, but in this quiz that was not an option. Number 8 was the question. I'm not sure if this person was at when they said the last webinar, if it was the last one we did on was it Thursday. But I'm not sure if that's what they're referring to. But hopefully, when I did the explanation during the session, I clarified it. Because there's a couple of things going on with how this question is written. The first is that you're going to start by using the highest table value if there is no fairway, meaning fairway is less than 20, based on the length of the hole. So based on 270 yards in that question number 8, that value in the less than 20 column was a 6. From there, I talked about it toward the end of that question, was we determine if any adjustments are applied, such as that W -1 or -2 adjustment, right? So within question 8, we didn't provide any information that meant that player could easily play from the fairway, onto the next shot, which happened to be the green. We were talking about the bogey player having a hit from 2-inch cool season grass, and for the length of that shot, which is 120 yards for that bogey player, that's a significant shot for that bogey.
3-wood.
For the bogey women, yeah. So a 3-wood out of the rough for a bogey man is difficult as well. So it's not just a gender thing; it's just a difficult shot. So this isn't easy. So this is why we just use the full table value for that specific question when we talk about when we got a 6 for bogey. If there's another scenario that this person is referring to where the player is in lighter rough, or it's patchy, but it's not quite the fairway, certainly look to using the W adjustment can apply. Like I said, certainly if that fairway was only 10 yards wide, we would still use that less than 20 column. So why would we not use it when there's a 0?
0 is less than 20.
0 is still less than 20, just like tennis. So, and we, like I said earlier, we wouldn't use the bogey can't play the hole because they can play the hole. It's going to be difficult, but they can play, certainly find their ball and play it.
This happens on not just tee shots. You can have a hole where the fairway ends 40, 50 yards short of the green, or maybe a par 3 where there is no fairway between the tee and the green, and the player's guaranteed to be in the rough. You wouldn't think about saying, well, let's use the bogey cannot play. They're obviously playing the hole, and they're playing by the rules of golf, so that shouldn't be used in that case.
Obviously, if you're going to hit into a pond or something like that where they literally cannot play the hole because they can't carry it or something, that's totally different than just being in the rough. So I'll pass it back over to Scott because I know he's got some education stuff.
Actually, we'll take a few of the open questions. We've got about 5 minutes of education that we want to get to, but there was a few that were asked during the webinar that we want to touch on if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of questions that have just popped up here. First off, more of an administrative question. What are we going to do with the resources from today's material? Are we going to share a slide deck, share question and answer document? Kind of what's our plan for that for the audience?
Yeah, the plan was to share that question and answer document once we get all the questions kind of written out in an easily digestible format where you can just read through them. As far as a printout, we probably would just send everybody the quiz, or not everybody, but send to the AGAs through the AGA resource portal the quiz itself with an answer document as well. So they could actually provide this quiz to other raters who are not able to make these sessions or people that are they just want to take it, and then give them an answer document as well that they could use to send them the answers when they're done or grade it later. But that's going to be a lot easier than the slides that you see on the screen here that have kind of like partial answers in the slide itself. We really want to be a little bit more detailed with how we came up with the final answer on all of those. So because we were here talking through it, it's a little easier to leave less detail on the screen than if somebody's reading it. So
great. One other question at the time. Also, if you have any other questions, just come into mind now. Feel free to send them to us. We do have a couple of minutes to take them. So what would be some rules to determine what mounds are, whether they would be under the definition of mounds or not?
Yeah, this is a subjective call, but the more you rate, the more you realize how easy it is to recognize mounds and when they are enough to give it a +1. There is a definition. If you look in the definition section of the course rating guide at the beginning, again, it's not perfect. It's not one of those like covers everything, But if you look at the mounds, it says a mound has distinct slope sides with an impact stance or lie. Mounds in the fairway are under topography. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but essentially there is a definition. It's really more of a gut thing where are these mounds going to impact the player in terms of stance, lie, ability to hit that next shot. If they're very gentle, you could have a mound that's 3 feet tall, but it's so gently sloped that that 3 feet takes 10 feet to get to it, that maybe it doesn't affect the player much at all. They don't have a steep, landing area, steep lie. But if it's a 3 foot tall mound, but it's only 2 or 3 yards in total diameter, now the ball's going to be sitting at some pretty harsh angles. And so again, it's something you just learn, over time and by looking at more and more ratings. But that's why you have a team. Just agree upon it as a team, because mounds are going to affect everybody, not just other than the fairway. At the green, they're always going to affect the whole group. But in the fairway, it might be one landing zone or another. But kind of a judgment thing.
Just to add to something to Scott, when we talk about mounds, we also have to look at hollows as well, because they're, as the book says, they're just reversed or inverted mounds. So certainly you have just as many stance and lie issues in a hollow as you would a mound. So they're treated, we call them mounds, but certainly talking about hollows as well, which are just as plentiful on golf courses throughout this country.
Often they're in the same spot.
Yeah, and often they're in the same spot. That's a good point, that this is an issue. So certainly wanted to make sure we included hollows as well.
All right. Any more questions we can cover here, John?
Sure. We just had one question regarding the transition zone adjustment. So a little longer question here. I'll try to paraphrase as best we can here. So just to be sure, the less than 50 or greater than 50 demarcation, would this only apply when you use a fairway value when adjusting the transition value up and down? He's referencing that the book says that the transition value may be adjusted in this situation.
Okay, so I think I get the question. So
the may versus
kind of
must.
going backwards to the question that was on the transition in the quiz, that the 50-50 value is our starting point. Anytime you have a hole in transition, that should kind of be your starting point for your green target. Now, whether you go up a point or down a point would depend on whether the player is deemed to get there significantly more or less than half the time. Now, the other part of that equation is maybe the player never gets there or always gets there. So things that happen between the tee and the green, maybe it's a downhill hole, maybe it's an uphill hole, something right in front of the green like a bunker that they cannot get there, that can change transition from transition to no transition, where they have to hit another shot or they get there every time. But once a hole is determined to be in transition, where they're not going to get there every time, but they can get there some of the time, your choices then are, can they get there 50% of the time? And if that's the case, just use the 50-50 value at the bottom. And that 50% or more means you're not going to evaluate another landing zone. If they get there 50% of the time or more, so if you use the bottom value at the bottom of the transition or the green target table or higher, you're going to say that's their only shot to the green. We're not going to evaluate a short shot from short of the green. If they're getting there less than 50% of the time is when you have another landing zone 10 yards short of the green, even though that might not be exact. That's one thing that people had questions on, is like 10 yards short of the green may put them 25 yards short of the middle, which this hole may only be in transition by 12 yards. So it's almost putting them farther back than they would be if they hit two normal shots. We're not worried about that. We're just trying to find a reasonable landing zone. One of the biggest problems with a hole that's in transition, where if you say, where is their ball mathematically going to be at the end of its roll, probably 85% of the time it's on the green. And how do you measure a fairway width? How do you determine whether there's topography issues when the ball's physically on the green at the end of its landing zone? We wanted to be in an area that was an actual fairway. So that's why we chose that. So again, not always consistent with where the ball might actually be mathematically, but it gives a little bit of consistency and also gives more practicalness to it in terms of evaluating a fairway as opposed to a green. So hopefully that makes sense.
All right, I believe that was our last question.
Good, perfect timing. So I'm going to take you just through a couple minutes of some education information going forward. And then I have a video that I'm going to try to share if our technology allows us to do this. It hasn't worked in the past, but it should work, so we'll see. So we're developing a new suite of digital course ring materials. And one of the reasons we are doing this webinar here today, and we did one last week, is that we were not able to get out on the road and in person to a lot of these sessions that we've done in the past. So knowing that potentially is an issue going forward, and even if it isn't, this is a much easier, more convenient way to learn for a lot of people, is to look at digital education as opposed to waiting for a seminar to be in your area that might be close enough to drive to or get to. So we're developing these regardless of whether COVID or anything, keeps us from getting out on the road and doing some in-person stuff in the future, which we do plan on doing some, but definitely not as much. So we're gonna have 3 different levels of content for digital. One of them is going to be beginner, and I'm going to show you a video here in a little bit, kind of what that entails, or kind of a little glimpse of what we have, which is essentially an introductory program. This is not for somebody who's already rating and doing ratings. This is more for somebody who's interested. Maybe has been on one rating as an observer, but hasn't actually used the book or used the form and done some rating. We're expecting this to be delivered locally by the AGAs. So we're going to provide this information to AGAs. They can then use their discretion on who they send this to. Interested raters, board members, people that are trying to maybe get interested in it. It's going to be more about awareness and like how the system works and some basics of like what do we evaluate. But it's not going to go into what is the green target rating for a 320-yard par 4 hole. That's not beginner. That's more intermediate. So the intermediate then is where the content to support raters who are developing an understanding of the system. How do we rate topography? How do we rate fairway? How do we rate all these different obstacles? So it's going to go through pretty much the whole system and how each obstacle, how each EPL works, the correction factors, adjustments, the things that you need to be kind of an intermediate rater, how to rate a course if you're a team member. Our 3rd level is going to be advanced, and this is where we have people who are probably more in terms of being a team leader or maybe a staff member in charge of the program, where not only do they need to know the basics, they need to know like maybe how to train raters, or how do you explain this better to somebody who doesn't understand it. Situations that are not covered in the system, things that are maybe in the interpretations, or things that are just more of a judgment call that you want to be consistent on. So we're going to have some advanced content as well for those people who are looking to be more on the training type situation, or maybe a staff person who wants to have all the answers when people ask them. So we do plan on piloting the beginners education program in Q1 of 2022. Really, we're looking to release these videos very soon. It could be even before the end of the year, but at minimum, it's going to be the very first part of January, where we're going to have these videos out and available for AGAs to use. Again, it's not marketing, but it's more just awareness and just give people a glimpse of what course rating is about. And then we'll continue to develop. We are planning on doing some in-person calibration seminars going forward, but we're also planning on developing an online calibration seminar where people can rate virtual holes that allows, with tools, with measuring tools and different views and scrolling around the hole, kind of like you're in a virtual world, to rate holes, and we're going to use those to help supplement or in some cases replace our calibration seminar. So we're developing those virtual holes and hope to have some online calibration seminars up and running as soon as the middle or late of next year. Probably not going to be before the spring. It's probably going to be summer to fall, but going forward, those will definitely be part of our plan. And then the certification program, we've mentioned this on some of our previous town halls and handicap live sessions and some of our in-person IAGA meetings and so forth. But we are going to have a course rating certification program that's kind of done with the education, not necessarily they have to be done together, but for those people who are interested, or associations who are interested in having people certified, we will have a certification program. It is discretionary, not just by the AGA, but by the individuals involved. However, there will be going forward, some requirements to have a certain number of people certified for course rating, in the future to make sure everybody's kind of at that level we were expecting to. So raters will be required to demonstrate their knowledge using online education, also evidence of their practical rating experience. So there's going to be times or information about how many courses they've rated, how many times have they been a team leader, things like that, but also calibration attendance, whether they're virtual or in person, those are going to go towards requirements or certification levels as well. We're going to have 3 levels of certification: a certified course rater, which is basically a team member who's recognizing contributions within their team, certified team leader who not only knows the system but also skills to lead the team, and then a team leader / trainer, somebody who might be called upon to help train others, maybe even train outside of their region. Maybe if a neighboring association needs some help, they could help with that. So that's not going to be a large number of people. Obviously, we're looking for people who have been doing this a while and really understand the system. So this is more information on this. We're trying to kind of leak it out as we get it. We're still developing the framework and some of the detail work, but we're hoping to have this up and running again about the same time as those calibration seminars, so we can have it up and running. So what I'll do then, before we get to our thank you, which is up on the screen, I'm going to run a video, and this is going to show you kind of a glimpse of what one of the introductory videos would look like. John, help me here. Where is it located at? Do I go into, it's not under polls, it's under sharing?
I believe so.
That's not it. I will, of course, is it under, this is just fantastic. It hasn't worked in the past, so it's not looking like it's working great this time. I thought it was under sharing. Maybe not. But anyways, we'll still try to find it here, but I know we're right up against our hour. Just want to thank everybody for attending this session. We know that a lot of you, you've had some interest in learning more about the system. It's just not a lot of opportunities with COVID and no seminars we've done over the years, and especially the last year and a half or 2 years. But hopefully we'll see many of you in the future. Those of you who haven't met before, hopefully we can meet in the future. But Matt, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to say we appreciate, our department certainly appreciates all of your efforts that you do, whether you're a volunteer for an AGA who goes out and rates the golf courses, or you're an AGA staff member. Certainly you impact us and help us do our job and make golf a better place. And, certainly you volunteers are doing this for the love and the passion of the game. So we can't stress how much we appreciate all the efforts that you all put forth to the course rating process, and then obviously impact the handicap system, the world handicap system at large. So I think
We got the video.
I think
so
Scott
I'm going to go ahead and show it here. Hopefully it works. Sometimes the audio doesn't come through, but it should come through the way we upload it. So we'll go ahead and run this video, and then you can feel free to kind of jump off at the end. And again, thanks to everybody for coming. Let's see if this works. Here we go. All right, so still on here? Yeah, we still have a bunch of people. So hopefully that helped you. I know I said you guys could jump off anytime after the video, but for those of you that stuck around, that's just like one of, I think we have like 15 different videos on different obstacles. And again, it doesn't go into details about how to actually use the tables and adjustments. It just talks about generalities, like we would measure the green, we would look for anything that's unusual, like an adjustment, but not specific to say like bounce or anything like that. So really, again, just getting somebody interested in the rating procedure and kind of what goes into it. So hopefully that video worked for you guys and you were able to hear it. But as you heard, there was a Scottish gentleman there, Kevin Weir, who works for the RNA. We do a lot of the stuff. We do everything we do for World Handicapping in partnership with the RNA. So most of the videos, most of the education you're going to see is going to be a combination of USJ staff and some RNA staff, and maybe even some committee members down the road. But we're trying to make this a World Handicap System education, not just USGA. So that's why you see a little bit different on the some of the folks that you see on the screen. So. All right. Well, again, thanks for sticking around those extra 5 minutes and seeing our video. And we will hopefully talk to everybody or see some of you in the future. And if not, have a good rest of the year and a good 2022.
Yes, have a good holiday season and take care, everyone. Thanks for attending.